I think the country is waiting to really have a fundamental shift in the way we think about things, what we do. I think the country's ready to come together. And I come from a district where President Trump did well and where I did well. And I think I'm in a position to help maybe bring us back together around some new issues, some new ideas. One of the main things I've been talking about, and will continue to talk about, is really the fact that a lot of people in the country, most people in the country, are just surviving at this point. Like, they're just trying to get by. And I want to put forth an agenda, and will put forth an agenda where we can move from a surviving mentality to a thriving mentality. Most people want to thrive. Most people want their kids to thrive. Most people want their communities to thrive and their country to thrive. But we've got a lot of work to do in order to get there. And the economic anxiety, we talk about the GDP, and we talk about the stock market, and we talk about the unemployment rate. We need to start talking about the national stress level for most people in the United States. And that is primarily, for a lot of people, an economic issue. And we've been dealing with this in the community that I represent. It's Northeast Ohio. I grew up halfway between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. So it's the old steel belt, old rust belt, and now we're working to create a tech belt, green belt, new economy belt there, which is really difficult given the structural issues that we have to deal with. And why I'm running and why I have a sense of urgency about what's happening is that these economic challenges, hi, how are you? How'd you get the front row seat? Just walked. You must be important. Never mind, good to see you. These economic issues have been going on for 40 years across the country. The area I come from really has been the epicenter of deindustrialization in the United States, in Youngstown, Ohio. I can go back 40 years and tell you a story about my father-in-law who worked at Youngstown Sheet and Tube, which was one of the largest steel producers in the world. And we had some of the highest per capita income in the country at that point. And then Black Monday came. And Black Monday came was September 19th, 1977, which saw the collapse of the steel industry in the United States. Youngstown Sheet and Tube closed down. My father-in-law eventually lost his job there, and he was unemployed for 13 months, right after buying a house, right after having his second daughter, which is my wife, and was searching and had no clue what they were going to do. I could go back 20 years. I remember getting a phone call from my cousin Donnie. All my cousins, they all worked in factories and the construction trades. My cousin Donnie called, and he said, you're never going to guess what I had to do. I said, today at work. I said, what? He says, I'm in my last couple days. This is a factory that used to be 13,000 people. And he said, I had to unbolt the machine from the factory floor. I had to put it in a box, and I had to ship it to China. Okay? I can go back a couple of weeks. I represent the Lordstown General Motors plant, which has made national news. And that has gone from 3 shifts to 2 shifts, and then just right after Thanksgiving, they announced that we're going to lose the last shift, and a few weeks ago was the last day. And I can tell you that my daughter called me. I was on a plane to go to D.C., and my daughter Bella, who's 15, called. She's crying, and I'm on an airplane. I'm like, because she called me, and so your 15-year-old daughter calls you. It's either something wrong or she wants money. She was crying, so I said, Bella, what's up? She starts telling me about her friend who has been crying to her all day at school. Her dad lost his job at General Motors, and they're going to have to move. And so she just told me last week, called me again. She said, hey, you remember so-and-so's dad? And I said, yeah. She said, he just had a stroke. I mean, this is the kind of pressure, stress, anxiety that people are going through all across the country. And we're seeing it, we saw it yesterday in our travels down the eastern part of Burlington and some of these other areas we were at, you know, there are about 40–50% of the American people today cannot withstand a $400 or $500 emergency, which means you blow your tire out in your car, and it can send you into an economic spiral. And I believe in my heart that we can do better than we're doing today. That if the President of the United States intentionally wants to help us resuscitate the middle class, that we can do it. And one of the things I've done, and why I think I'm prepared for this job, is starting to represent Youngstown and Akron, Ohio. I was thinking to myself, I am obsessed with this. I was thinking, how do we get this community, and I'm sure the mayor understands this too, how do we get this community? I've heard the stories. I've watched the old economy come, and I watched it erode. We watched globalization. We watched automation. We watched jobs go to Mexico. We watched competition from China. And no one was helping us plug back in to the global economy. Of course the global economy generates wealth. Of course it does. Of course capitalism generates wealth. That's what it does. But it wasn't remembering. It wasn't plugging us in. It was concentrating the wealth more and more to what we see today, where the top 1% owns 90% of the wealth. So I kept thinking, how do we position these communities in front of areas of the economy that are ready to grow? Because growing up, everyone was saying, we got to get those steel mills back. Now, how do we get the steel mills back? And those of us who were younger who stayed, because so many of my friends had left, they went to Washington, they went to North Carolina, they went to Florida, they went to California, because there was an opportunity there. And I was hell-bent on making sure that we started creating opportunity. So the question is, what are the areas around the economy that are growing? And so we went to work. Democrats, Republicans, independents, state, local, Chamber of Commerce, port authorities, whoever can be a part of making this go. And one of the areas we got in front of was additive manufacturing, 3D printing, for industrial-sized projects, airplanes, engines, parts for F-16s, working with the military to help make that happen. And I had that same idea for the United States. I'm going to give you one example about it, and then I'd like to really open it up for questions and have you all drive the conversation. Take the issue of electric vehicles. There are 1 to 2 million electric vehicles today in the United States. By 2030, there's going to be 30 million electric vehicles made somewhere. I want them made in the United States. I want the batteries made in the United States. I want the charging stations made in the United States. I want our communities to benefit from it. I want to use tax incentives and research that the Department of Energy is going to do, the National Science Foundation is going to do, NIST, Department of Defense. I want to incentivize the growth from this industry to push the growth into distressed communities, communities of color, and rural America. Areas that have been left behind the last 40 years. We have got to resuscitate the middle class. And how do we cut these workers in on the deal? With productivity bonuses, with profit sharing. How do we make sure that these workers are finally cut in on the deal? These people are working their rear ends off. Everyone likes to say, well, people on welfare and all that. No, people are working hard. Yes. And they cannot get ahead. And they need a president who gets in the office and sits down with the Department of Energy and the Big Three and anyone else who needs to be involved and say, how do we dominate the electric vehicle market? Because right now, China dominates the electrical vehicle market. They dominate 40% of it. How do we do that same thing around solar? Right now, China dominates 60% of the solar market. How do we do that around wind? How do we do that around additive manufacturing? It's the presidency that does this. It's the most vital office in our democracy. And we need someone who understands where the economy is going and has the guts and the toughness to sit down. We don't need a savior. We don't need a superstar. We need a grinder. Yeah. Right? And I'm a grinder. I get up every day, I work my rear end off. I come from a community that knows how to go to work. We want to work. We don't know any different. My father-in-law didn't know any different. My parents didn't know any different. My wife doesn't know any different. We just go to work. And you can't get things done unless you roll up your sleeves and you go to work. And, you know, you look at the General Motors issue. The president hears about the General Motors issue, picks up his phone and says he's going to do something nasty to General Motors, and then puts his phone back down and picks his phone back up and goes off on John McCain or Barbara Bush or race baiting about Maxine Waters or LeBron James or something. You got to roll your sleeves up and go to work. It's hard. It's hard work, and it's going to take a long time. And we all have to come together around an agenda that can move us forward. And I look forward to doing that. I will tell you, lastly, that I understand what families are going through. I know their fears. I know their insecurities. I know they feel left out. But I also know their hopes, and I know their dreams, and I know what they want for their kids. And the only thing I can really promise you is a couple of things. One, I'm going to work my rear end off. And two, that every day when I get up and I walk into the Oval Office, that I will be working for those people and you and others. And your fears will be my fears, and your hopes and your dreams will be my hopes and dreams. And in America, we don't have power as politicians. We hold power that is given to us for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. We hold it. And if you give me the opportunity to hold power, I will administer it and execute it on behalf of the working class people that have not been able to get ahead the last 4 years. That is my pledge to you. And as Bobby Kennedy said during his campaign, I do not promise you ease, I do not promise you comfort, but I do promise you these: weariness, hardship, and sacrifice. But with these, I promise you victory.